Hey, Brennan Compton, BRC fallow deer. Getting close to winter time, and temps are starting to drop. We've already had our first snow for the year. And winter time in Kansas means time to feed hay. We usually use square bales, or round bales for the cattle, but for the deer, just because of the way that it is, we're using square bales, small squares of alfalfa. And that's what I got. A pile of them sitting behind me here. I think we got 120 bales this year, something like that. And partially because of how dry the fall was, they're running through them pretty quickly. So there's just not a whole lot of, there is some cool season grasses and forbs growing out in the pen, but not a lot. So we had to start feeding hay a little bit early, and anyway, we're going through a lot of hay. And because of the drought, hay prices this year are up. So it kind of got me looking at, other areas on the farm where we might be able to plant a little bit of alfalfa. I've never done that. I've been around haying, and when I was younger, we put up square bales, but I don't know a whole lot about it. But I found a couple places that we could probably plant a little bit, enough that it would probably be worth it if I can keep my costs controlled. I'm not going out and buying new equipment or anything like that. That wouldn't make any sense, I don't think. But anyway, a couple of days ago, I drug home a piece of equipment that hopefully will help that plan become reality. I'm gonna warn you, it's rough. Well, here it is. International wire tie, they call it a lock twist 430. Like new condition. I don't know if it's built in the 70s maybe. I think they made them up to the early 80s. But yeah, this is it. So I found this baler from a guy here locally who used to rebuild square balers. Square balers, they live and die by being timed right, and the knotters or wire ties and all that being in good shape, which is all of this mechanism. He says he had gone through it and kind of made sure all that was good, and he actually baled 1,500 acres with it after he was done. There's some bit about how he loaned it to somebody else for a year, and when he went back to get it, the guy had left a straw bale in the baler and left the baler sitting outside, and that was the death of this machine. The baler was sitting right here. So what happens is that holds moisture, and then it just eats the metal. I mean, it's just rusted as all get out. This thing, I mean, it's just, there's no saving this part of the baler. Now, he even left the wire sitting in the holder. So there's a couple $100 worth of wire sitting here that's now is just junk because it's all rusted. So it's just unfortunate that people don't care for their equipment, let alone somebody else's equipment that they're borrowing any better than they do, at least in this machine's case. There is some other rusty areas like here where it collects the hay, and that's just real thin sheet metal. That's no big deal. It doesn't really, there's no moving parts that rely on that being, you know, placed, positioned correctly. I'll just patch that with some sheet metal, it'll be fine. But this is called a bale chamber. So it actually runs, it's kind of a big square that runs all the way from the flywheel, starts right here, and runs this entire length of the machine, all the way to the back. Well, the reason that it's important is, and it's kind of all tore apart, I kind of started taking it apart to see what kind of shape other parts are in. But the reason it's important is these springs basically set the tension that drives how tight or loose the bale is. So they basically apply tension to the top of the bale as it's being pushed out, but before being tied. As it's being pushed out, if it's harder for that ram to push the bale out, then it's going to pack it tighter. So this bale chamber back here, that's key to that whole having good, consistent, tight bales. And obviously this one, it's junk. Anyway, so the bale chamber, I found a salvage company in Missouri, tractor salvage company, and they had a 430 baler. And according to them, I haven't seen it yet, but according to them, the bale chamber was not rusty at all, which, that's great. They wanted more money than I paid for the whole baler, but you know, if I had good mechanical parts and a good structure for the bale chamber, I've got a great working baler, so I'm still going to buy it. But you know, of all the things I've done, I've rebuilt car engines, and I build stuff around here all the time. For some reason, this intimidates me a little bit. The fact that that entire section has to be pulled out of the rest of what's going on here. I don't know why, but that really intimidates me. I'm going to try to take stuff off in sections so they don't mess up the timing on the wire ties. It's basically just all bolted together, but it's a big, heavy piece of metal that somehow I've got to pull out of the guts of this thing. So that's the wintertime project. I'm trying to learn more about it to make sure I don't take something apart that I won't be able to get put back together. Take a lot of pictures, a lot of videos, so I can reference those when I'm looking at a pile of parts and bolts. But that's the baler. I got a rake. Rake's an option, which is kind of what set off. I thought about planting alfalfa. I don't know. Earlier this spring, I kind of had the thought, but I kind of looked at balers, and what I could find was $3,000 or $4,000, and that's for one that's, you know, supposed to be decent, but it's kind of hard to say when they're all, you know, that same age. They're all, whatever, 40 years old, 40, 50 years old. One guy says field ready, and that means it'll bale 10 bales and then miss one, and you got to deal with it. A friend of mine had an old sickle bar mower sitting in the back of his shed, and so it came home with me. It was I think $100, and if you think the baler's old, who knows how old that thing is. It turns over, nothing's frozen up on it. The teeth are pretty rusted, little cutter sections, nothing that can't be fixed. So yeah, I think right now the process is getting sections off this baler. I'm trying to get the plunger out so I can see when I go get when I go get the bale chamber from the salvage place, if there's other parts I'm gonna need, I might as well get them in one trip, because I think it's a 3.5 hour drive from here. So I'm trying to get the plunger out. I've got it disconnected already, but there's some other parts that have to be taken out of the way to get it pushed out the back. And because of how jacked up the tail end of this thing is, I think what I'm going to do is just bring the torch out and start cutting sections out of the side. It's not salvageable anyway, and that'll be easier than trying to push the plunger out through a hole that's not square anymore. It's really a pretty tight tolerance plunger. Getting all put back together and hopefully square is going to be a feat. But that's the baler. I hope I haven't got myself in too deep. Time will tell. Well, we're making progress here. This is the plunger again. So you'll be looking at it. We're looking at it sitting on its face. So if you're looking at the side of the baler, it'd be like this. So this is what moves back and forth and compresses the hay. So we're looking at the bottom here. Here were the old bearings, the ones that were at least still there. They're obviously no good. They were all frozen up or completely jacked up like that one. You can see the ball bearings in there. So I got some new ones. The factory ones were expensive, but these are just, I don't know, not generic, but they're the correct size and all that. That one's not new, but the correct size. They're just straight from the bearing manufacturer, so they were like $6 a piece or something instead of 30. This piece was completely missing when I pulled this thing out, this whole assembly. I got that from my donor bale chamber when I picked that up. These bearings, I'm not going to say that they're new, but they're good and free and they're not worn down. They still have a rounded surface. And this thing, what it does is it's adjusted by a threaded rod in here to move up and down. That's what helps set, it rotates the whole plunger kind of this direction, because it's riding on rails here. There's a rail right here, and then this is obviously on the floor, and then same rail on the floor, but there's nothing really guiding the top part of the knife. So you set your clearance for the bottom part of the knife by adjusting the rollers and the rail, but for the top you kind of have to rotate the whole plunger that direction or the other, and that's what you do here. You basically adjust this assembly up or down, and it rides on a set of rails in the bale chamber, so it pivots this whole plunger as you adjust it. So the fact that wasn't even there, I can't believe this thing was working, to be honest. But so it's got, those are the old rollers, new ones there. This one's still good. It was a little bit dry, but I keep spraying it with lube, and it's basically the same diameter as a new one, so I hate to replace it, especially since it's staked on. I had to pull this one out. It's kind of ugly, but it's staked onto a stud, and that was not a lot of fun. It's not bolted on like this one. So I let that one be. No more than I'm going to use this thing. It'll be good for years. And I still have new bearings if they decide to go out for some reason. But that's the plunger. It's pretty much done. The rollers are all replaced. I double checked the rub blocks, made sure that they're in good shape. I do need to sharpen the knife on this one. I mean, it's really pretty sharp, so maybe I don't. But this thing's pretty much good to go. Can't say that for the rest of the baler, but I can get this thing off the workbench and this side of the needle comes up and rubs on part of the nodder, so it needs to be flat. And I think I'll reform that just a little bit once I get this thing pinned into place, so there's not gaps on this edge. But the wire comes up and it runs underneath this little pin and over this bearing. I'll pretty that up a little bit on that side, but it's close to there. Well, here it is. Pretty much finished. I'll put some paint on it to keep it from rusting, but a good hardened bearing in there now. Pretty much ground smooth on that side without grinding the weld away. A little bit misshapen, but I think it'll work. So, one down, one to go. Well, hopefully, it looks like I've got good thick metal there to weld to. Reasonably thick around the sides. Didn't get into that plate too bad. Cool, now if I can just replicate this cut on the new one, I gotta cut that off right there, but replicate it on the new one, and then get it all square, and about a million other small steps in between, I'll be set. So the big thing now is trying to match this cut on the new piece. Now it's not straight across because of, well, there's some bracing here, there's bracing here. I couldn't find a great place to cut straight across, and in reality, a little bit of a curved cut adds it adds some extra surface area to weld, and if you think about a piece of metal welded along a straight line, that's one dimension that it, if you flex in that one straight line, it's going to break, or it could break. Whereas if it's got a little bit of a zigzag to it, there's multiple directions of force going on there, a little bit of shear and a little bit of the opposite of shear is. So anyway, that's what I got going. So I cut myself a template. First I measured from known points, like bolt holes or the edge here, and I drew a line where I believe I need to cut, and I'm just going to cut along the back side of that. You can tell that restrictor plate used to be. And then I cut myself a template off of the old piece to see if it lines up, and it's pretty close. I guess. I don't know if you can see it. That's why I put it in the shop. Thank goodness. Welcome to Kansas. Back in the shop. Well, I've been making quite a bit of progress on this baler. I haven't had the camera rolling for quite a bit of it because a lot of it's been spray painting, and it gets really fumy in here. So I didn't want to mess up the camera, and I don't know, painting is kind of pain. I tried to video some of it, but there's so many different parts of this deal, this baler, that I kind of ended up putting one coat on everything, and anyway, it's been a long process. So that thing's pretty much how I left it. The new bale chamber. It's all painted on the inside. It's not perfect, but black is cheaper than International Harvester red. So it's black on the inside. You don't really care what it looks like, but this guide rail, that's what the rollers on the plunger ride on, so they're loose because it'll all have to be adjusted. I got the stationary knife sharpened, I guess, reprofiled, painted, and reinstalled. Got all the paint on this inner chamber. It looks dirty and dusty, but all the paint on this inner part of the bale chamber was all cleaned off with wire wheel and repainted. So I'm kind of to the point where I need to put this plunger back in. I want to do that before I put the rest of the bale chamber on. Just, I guess I don't really know why. I don't know if it'll be easier or harder, but this is the way I'm going to do it. And I don't know, if you look back at the other videos, you can see what it looked like before, but it's all shiny and cleaned up and repainted, and I need to shoot a little paint on that knife. The plunger blade is reprofiled. The way you do this is it's got an edge, just like it's a single bevel knife basically. So it has a bevel here, but then at the bottom you kind of reverse the bevel. So instead of going this way, it goes this direction. That way, as the knives come together, the bottom is supposed to be the closest, the closest between the plunger knife and the stationary knife that would sit right here as that plunger moves back and forth to cut the hay. So it's closest at the bottom, but you don't want them to overlap. Obviously that would break another shear pin and whatever. So you bevel that the other direction, so if they do get too close, they kind of slide past each other at the bottom. So that's the idea there. You can maybe see the bevel going this direction, and then it reverses and goes this direction. Now that thing's got a bunch of new rollers and a new paint. So it should roll in easier than it came out because it actually has rollers. So we'll see if I get this thing stuck back in without hurting myself. Now it's not adjusted, but when I pulled this thing out, it was all I could do to get this thing out of here. And look at this. It's being pulled back by the arm just for gravity. And I'm pulling, I don't know, 5 pounds to pull it forward. That is unbelievable. That's awesome. And you can see the two knives, how that, when I was telling you that angle, they're close at the bottom, but if they were to touch, the way that angle's cut forces them apart, and then it's a close clearance the rest of the way up as it cuts. That's just pretty cool. I mean, I knew it would slide better. I don't want it to go out the back. I knew it would slide better, but man, that's just... I mean, it's just sliding because the baler's tilted downhill, that's all it is. That's great. Alright, I'll attach it to the arm here, and I've got some couple of restrictor, I don't know what you call them, little restrictor, they're not the restrictor plate on the side, but little restrictors that go on the top to, again, help keep that hay forward. Cool, I'm excited. Man, that looks so much better than it did. It's not perfect, it's not going to be perfect, but I've got to adjust the up and down. Those rollers fit between these two pieces of angle. That's kind of what sets the whole tilt. So I set the clearance against the bottom of the knives with this guide rail here against a roller, and then as the blades come up, you should have just a little more clearance at the top than the bottom, but just barely. And you set that by tilting the entire plunger in or out, you know, effectively in or out at the top by adjusting those rollers up and down. So it rides here on this lower rail, I guess lower and upper, that's where the force is, depending on, you know, direction and how it's pushing. So it rides here, and then it rides on a roller, 2 rollers like this, and 2 rollers on this side. That's what keeps this whole thing aligned. So that's cool. I'm excited to see that put back together. I'll throw the bolts in it, I think, and keep going. Okay, I think I'm going to go inside and light a fire. Catch you next time. Starting to recognize this thing yet? back in the shop working on this baler. And I got the plunger installed, and now it's kind of adjusting it. Ideally, you have the whole bale chamber on to adjust this thing, but it'd be a lot harder to reach in and have to do it, so I'm going to do it like this. here's the plan. It's starting to look like something now. So everything from about there back, that's the new piece, and that's all original. Some of it just looks painted new. But it's really key to get this back portion dimensionally the same as the original for several reasons. One of them is that the knives are mounted to this plate and that uses the old mechanism, but you know, if this back isn't straight or square, now it helps that I have this plate here. I'll explain that in a second. But for example, the metering wheel mounts on the old piece, so if this dimension is different, now I've got a gap issue here that there's really no adjustment for this arm. You know, it's just in or out. I mean, I could cut it and shorten it if I had to or something, but it just needs to be the same, and it needs to be square. But here's my plan. I've got it mounted to the original frame in as many places as possible. I've got this plate that was the original plate that I didn't take off of the rest of the mechanism. So those holes should be located the same as they were on the previous bale chamber. I've got a pretty big gap to fill, but I can do that with a piece of rod. The new chamber's bolted through the top, through here, and here on a piece that was never removed, and then this plate that was never removed, and it's also attached forward of the new piece. It's bolted here. Alright, we're in the shop. What are we working on today?
The baler.
The baler? What's wrong with it?
It's not working very well. It needs a lot of work.
Yep. You gonna fix it?
Yeah.
Good. So I think we're there. The idea being, as those needles come up, if there were to be hay behind the needles and a plunger hits that, it's going to break the needles. Because it's going to compress that hay into the needles, and the gaps that you saw, those slots in the plunger, are going to be packed full of hay. So that's the idea. The needles come up just behind the plunger face, where it's pushed all the hay out of the way and created, you know, the slot that they're going to slide into just behind the face, and they come up protected. That's the idea, and I think we nailed it. I think I'm going to call that. I think I'm going to call that quits for tonight. That's progress. Well, we got all the mechanics functional, I think. So I'd like to get a coat of paint on the auger and patch a couple holes in that, whatever, collection chamber area. There's holes going all the way through the back. It's pretty rough. It's nothing that has to be perfect. It just kind of collects the hay while the auger pushes it over. So nothing like the other parts who had clearances and, you know, had to be tight and right and whatever. So we'll get that auger taken off one way or another. Yeah, you can go play in the snow. Get your hat and your gloves.